Welcome you to Enflux's Streamlined Clinical Evaluation Reporting, and specifically looking at ways we can enhance insights using the CORE ELMS and Enflux platforms. So I'd like to go ahead and get started. It looks like we have many of the attendees that have RSVP'd. So a few housekeeping, tidbits here. First, we've muted all participants, but certainly that doesn't mean we want you to not have a voice. And so please use the Zoom Q&A chat feature to ask questions or send feedback. And if you have any comments, please join in. We'd love for this to be more interactive than just listening. The webinar recording will be available afterwards, and so we'll send that out tomorrow once we have the file processed, and we would love to, meet with you individually if you have specific needs or questions for your program. And if you're already a client, you know that you're always welcome to reach out and we're here to support you. So please share in the chat if you have a second. Just introduce yourself. What's your location in the world? Your discipline that you work in, and then whether or not you currently use CORE ELMS, or if you're not using CORE yet, how do you track your experiential learning? So the other piece I want to mention to you is it seems like Zoom did an update. So on my screen, in order to see the shared, presentation screen, I had to click the tab at the top that says Jen Jones's screen, and then I can see the faces of the presenters and the screen. So if you're not seeing a PowerPoint presentation with my picture and Jen's picture on it right now, definitely look up at the top of your Zoom and look for those tabs and click on the one that has the screen option. And if you have any questions, of course, throw it in the chat. So to introduce us, my name is Corey. I'm the Director of Growth and Strategy here at Enflux, and I've had the opportunity to speak with some of your programs, and I am excited that you're here today. And my colleague, who will be really giving the demonstration about all of the things related to how to maximize the use of these platforms, is our famous Jen Jones. And so, Jen, I'm going to let you take it from here and introduce yourself and dig.
Hi, I'm Jen. It's nice to be with you guys today. I am the business intelligence architect, and I have a background in institutional research. I worked for a private university for about 9-10 years and was the director of institutional research there. So what I do is try to take all this lovely data that we collect and present it in a way that makes sense and is helpful for you. So let's get started. During today's session, we'll cover what specific information we collect from CORE ELMS. We'll talk about how our Enflux dashboards can help you track both student achievement and your preceptor performance longitudinally. We know that you want to look at things over time, how things are progressing in your programs. We'll talk about a few basic rules to keep in mind when you're setting up things in CORE and when you're starting a new cohort or a new semester. And we'll try to answer any questions you have about tracking and evaluating your experiential learning. We have 3 dashboards in our system. The CORE ELMS evaluations. I say ELMS. I have to make myself say ELMS. I know that CORE is kind of specific about saying ELMS. So we have one for the evaluations, and that's where we have all of the information about evaluations of students, preceptors, and sites, where you can compare performance across your cohorts or grad years, where you can track things about individual students, and then identify areas of concern for both your students and your preceptors. We also have a dashboard for timesheets if you're using that to track how much time students are spending in their clinical evaluation, in their clinical areas. And then we also have field encounters. So let's start taking a look at a few of them. We're going to start with the ELMS evaluations dashboard. And it has a menu a little bit unlike most of our other dashboards in that there's just a lot of information available. You guys know that this is where the meat of your experiential learning data shows up. There's a lot of data to synthesize. There's a lot of setup, a lot of custom flexibility. You can set up evaluations however you like. And that can be both a blessing and a curse. And we'll talk about how, how it can be kind of a curse if you don't really plan ahead. The dashboard looks complicated because your data is complicated. So let's take a look at just the menu itself. And I'm going to reload just to make sure that we have fresh data here. This is the menu itself for the dashboard, and it's broken into 3 areas, all evaluation types. So this is going to be evaluations of the preceptor, evaluations of the student, of the site. Everything on this row of the dashboard applies to all of those evaluation types. Then we have a set of dashboards that's just for student tracking, and then a set that's about preceptor information only. It's isolated to those. So we are going to start with something that's called the percent and number of responses dashboard. And if you are already a CORE user, you might know the PDF report. Everybody that we've talked to calls it the PDF report. And it's one that people really like, the layout of, the format. And what we're going to allow you to do in this dashboard is to see things longitudinally. So let's take a look at this percent and number of responses. We'll go into the dashboard and we're going to set this. We want to look at just student evaluations. So we're going to set evaluation of the student. And we're going to set our evaluation title filter to ambulatory care. Throughout this, we're going to use ambulatory care as the rotation that we're looking at. So we'll take a look here at ambulatory care evaluation. And here you can see, this is our title of the evaluation. These are the sections, and oftentimes they'll match the domains that you're evaluating. And then within each section, you have individual questions. And this dashboard will show you your rubric definitions, and then how many students in each cohort or grad year have received that evaluation answer. So we'll be able to tell exactly what percent here. For example, you probably want people to either regularly or almost always meet a certain value here. And you're concerned about ones that might not. So we might want to see who has not met these requirements, and you can click on just say, we want to see who usually is doing it, but not every time. And that will give us both the preceptor names and the student names involved so that we can follow up with them. And again, these are really helpful when you're doing your accreditation reporting and you need to show a certain percent of the students have met a particular score. Next, we want to look at this grades with display options. And if you score your evaluations in total with a final or a midpoint grade for the whole evaluation, these are really helpful because they let you compare things over time, and you get to pick 2 ways that you want to group this data. Again, we're going to set our filter to ambulatory care. And we're going to set our options here to evaluation title and preceptor. And we want to see evaluations of the student. We want to see if our preceptors are evaluating students consistently, or if there's anybody that we need to worry about that maybe scores more difficultly than doesn't score as maybe easily or fairly as some of the others do. So what we'll do is we'll look at these evaluations. We're going to look at, oops, we picked the wrong one here. Sorry about that. We're going to look at ambulatory care. And then we're going to sort here on 2023. All of these columns have a sort. And when you see that little icon, you can tell, you can sort each column. The dashed line is going to be the average score for all of those. So the average score for these preceptors on this evaluation is a 63.36. These are evaluations of the student and how the preceptor is scoring them. The band is going to be a standard deviation. So we can see that we have a couple of preceptors who score below the standard deviation, and it looks like they do it kind of consistently. So we might want to follow up with those evaluators. Okay. Another thing that you can do in your evaluations is create questions that are multi-selects, where a student or a preceptor can select multiple options. It's not a rubric score. They just need to check how many times they did something or how many of these apply to this question on the evaluation. And oftentimes it's used to track how many of a certain experience a student had. And so we have some dashboards that will let you see that as well. So we're going to look at these multi-select questions. And in this example, again, we're going to go to our ambulatory care rotation. And here we're able to see how many times the students said that they worked with these students, nursing students, nurse practitioners, physicians, and which practitioners. Now, you may need to see the total number of times that happened, but probably what you also are concerned about is how many students in each of these grad years had those experiences. So you can change it to number of students, and that will tell you how many students interacted with each of these different types of students and practitioners. Do you have any questions about that so far? All right. Let's take a look at the student-focused dashboards. We have a score alerts and auto fails. And again, this is something that you can set up in CORE, where if a student scores a particular value on an evaluation, an email gets fired off to someone that says, this is a concern, we need to follow up. So we want to give you the ability to track that, not just email by email, but in total. And so we've recapped that. We also give you a place to look at all of a student's evaluations in one place. This is really helpful for advisors when you're trying to advise a student, or in our system in Enflux, when you're trying to create an action plan for that student's success. You can capture the information at a certain point in time, then revisit it later and see how the student has progressed. We also have section and question details, where you can set this value demonstrates competency, and then see how many students in the cohort averaged that score, and then easily identify the ones that need remediation or additional work. So let's take a look first at the score alerts and auto fails. And again, we're going to go back to our ambulatory care. And here we're going to look at an evaluation called entrustable professional activities, where this is one where we just kind of check off these students have been able to do this successfully or not. So we're going to set entrustable professional activities. And then you can see each of these are an instance where a student did not meet that success value. You can see all the information about the evaluation, and if the preceptor entered comments or the student entered comments, you'd be able to see those as well. We can also click on a grad year and then see all of the issues that particular students had, and you can filter down to an individual student and see how many times they had an actual score alert show up. Again, this can be used for your action plans for remediation, things along those lines. We also give you the ability to look at a single student over time and see all of their evaluations, get a snapshot of their progress, compare their midpoint to their final results, and make sure that they're progressing as they should. Make sure that a student didn't score really well on the midpoint and then kind of bomb the final evaluation. You'd be able to see those things here as well. So let's take a look at how we would look at a single student. You're going to go into the single student review here. And we're going to select a student. We're going to pick Jerry right here. And you can see all of the evaluations that he's had in his career. So he's had evaluations for hospital, for ambulatory care, community pharmacy. And for each one of these, we'll see the average grade. And then if they had a midpoint grade as well, you'll see the average midpoint grades. And over here, you'll see how many times that evaluation was done for that particular student. So this is a very quick recap, how the student is progressing over time. But let's say we want to drill in and see the details. Again, we're looking at ambulatory care. So let's take a look at ambulatory care for this student. They had 2 evaluations. And on this first one, it looks like we did not have a midpoint evaluation. The second one has both a midpoint and a final. So we can see that they actually improved their scores from midpoint to final. And again, if we had comments that the preceptor had entered, we'd be able to see those as well. And this is broken down by section. If you want to go into specific details and see all of the questions, the individual questions and how the student performed on each one, that again is as easy as clicking on the box here. You can click on either a section name or the entire evaluation, and it will take you to how they were evaluated on each of those questions. Here's an example on self-awareness and on professionalism. You can see that these values show up in orange on the first evaluation. Those were score alert values. So if a student received a score alert, it'll be easily highlighted, and you can talk about that while you're visiting with the student and advising them. Any questions about that? We also have section and question details that you can look at, again, over time and by cohort, and where you can set a demonstrates competency value. So you can see how many students are actually meeting that competency value. And you can drill in and see which students did not demonstrate competency in each of the domains so that you can follow up with them and again, create some action plans. So let's take a look at section details here. Again, we're going to filter down to our ambulatory care. And we're going to focus on entrustable professional activities. You can see that we have a couple of evaluations that we do in ambulatory care. We have the evaluation of the API itself with several different things that are looked at. And then we have these entrustable professional activities, which we also are doing. We're going to look at just the one evaluation. And this one looks like, based on these scores, it looks like the acceptable answer on this rubric is either a 0, you didn't do this, or a 1, you did. So we're going to say that 1, we want to see any values that are below 1. And here we can tell in this view that 20 of our 30 students in the 2023 cohort have met those evaluation scores at the 1, the acceptable value, and 10 have not. We had 30 students, so 20 met it and 10 did not. And we want to go in and figure out who those 10 students were. So we'll go into our final evaluations. Again, we're going to set entrustable professional activities. And we're going to set ambulatory care. And then we want to see just those who did not meet our scores, where the value was below the value that we said was an acceptable score. And there we go. We have all of the students who have not met our requirements. The other nice thing about this view is that there's an export at the top. If you needed to export that and send it to follow up, we'll actually export that as a CSV file. And you can use that in your documentation or in any notifications that you would have to other people who are going to work with these students. Okay. Let's take a look at some of the preceptor monitoring information that we have. You'll see here on the menu that we have score alerts and auto fails. We also have section and question details. Those are going to be very much like what the student sees. Same format, the screen works the same way, but these are student evaluations of the preceptor rather than preceptor evaluations of the student. We also have what's called preceptor comps, where you're trying to compare a preceptor's average evaluation scores to the average of similar preceptors. Again, to try to identify preceptors that need maybe more coaching or follow up with them. You can identify easily where preceptors scored below the group average, and then you can drill in to see if it was one disgruntled student who just checked all ones or something on their evaluation, as opposed to whether it was a consistent lower score over time. So let's take a look at preceptor comps. And Again, we're going to choose our ambulatory care rotations. And we're going to look at a particular preceptor here. And you can see that overall, the preceptor score is a 99.25. This is great. This is a really good preceptor. All of the other preceptors in ambulatory care also have really good scores. The average score there is a 98. But we want to see exactly what those scores look like. So when you click the evaluation title, you will see each of the sections and questions. And then anywhere that the preceptor was below the average, you will see that highlighted in orange. Now, this is not necessarily an evaluation of the preceptor here. That this is a student who's saying the distance that I had to travel felt unreasonable to get to the site. And again, it's not a low score on average. It's just lower than the average of all of the preceptors in that group. So we want to take a look and see if that's one student or multiple students. So we can actually see evaluation details just by saying show. Looks like there were 4 evaluations that made up this preceptor's average. And we can go down to that question. The distance that I had to travel to reach the site was reasonable. And it looks like 1 student scored a 3.5. Everyone else gave them the top score of 5. 1 student scored a 3.5. So it does look like it's the 1 student that had an issue. Again, good follow-up here, trying to compare a preceptor to their comparable group. You can also export the details here from this screen. Another thing that's really important when you're talking about your preceptors is that they provide prompt feedback to your students. That's important to student success. So we have a couple of different ways to look at that. We have the first dashboard that we'll show you says which preceptors take more than 14 days past the end of a rotation to complete the final evaluation for the students. You know, if they're taking more than 2 weeks to finish that final evaluation, probably want to follow up on that. And then there's also a view that's the time between midpoint and final. So if a student is getting a midpoint evaluation, they need to get it in time to be able to make adjustments before that final evaluation happens so that they can correct any behaviors that they need to correct. So let's take a look at those. We're going to go first to preceptor completion times. And again, we're going to filter our rotation type down to ambulatory care. Anywhere in our dashboards that you see a little H after the column name, that means it's a hierarchy and you can expand that. So here we have this rotation of ambulatory care. 15% of the evaluations in 2021 were done after more than 14 days after the end of the rotation. We're getting better in 2022. 2023 is about the same. And in 2024, we just don't have enough yet to be able to tell. So let's see who the preceptors are that are performing kind of slowly. Where do we need to follow up? And then we can also, this will show you for each evaluation. So here we have this Justice Koss, who's 67% of his evaluations were done more than 14 days after the end of the rotation. We can see that the average of those was actually 19 days after the end of the rotation before they completed them. If you want to highlight and see very easily who was an issue, you can just click on the greater than 14 days and it jumps out at you so you can see where we have issues. So let's go back and see how they're doing on midpoint to final. And again, we'll filter our rotation type down to ambulatory care. And we'll expand. And we can see here the average number of days between the midpoint and the final completion. So here, larger is better. We've given them a little more time to make corrective action before their final evaluation. Let's sort these columns and see what we're dealing with. So I'm sorting on 2023. And here I can see, again, for example, this Justice here, Justice Koss, it only has 3 days on average between the midpoint and the final. That's probably not enough for a student to take corrective action. So we can click on them, and then we can see their individual evaluations and how many days there were. If you click over it, it'll show you a tooltip that says when the rotation started and ended, when the midpoint was complete, when the final was complete. So you can, again, follow up and figure out what was going on. And this one actually looks really bad because we did the midpoint and the final after the end of the rotation date. Another thing that's helpful when you're evaluating preceptors is comments. So again, we're going to look at the comments by, we're going to pick our rotation, ambulatory care, and then we can see that for Lois, this one, again, you can filter down by preceptor and you can export. And this is great. Lois is a great preceptor. She's getting good feedback. She's excellent. And students would recommend this site for future rotations. That's great feedback. You want to be sure that she knows that. So you can export that and send that to Lois as well. Another thing that we'll give you is a kind of a quick and dirty calculation of student to preceptor ratio. This is something that's really important for accreditation, that you have enough preceptors covering these rotations so that students are getting the attention that they need. And so what we'll do here is actually calculate the distinct number, the count of students in that rotation divided by the count of preceptors in that rotation. And this will show you for each of those rotation types how that's working. It's quick and dirty calculation. Any questions about evaluations at all? I'm going to show you real quickly a couple of things on timesheets, and then we'll move on. So one of the other things that you may have to track is whether students are spending enough time in their clinical rotations. So we're going to go to this alternate summary view here. We're going to pick, because we've been sticking with it, we're going to pick our rotation type of ambulatory care. And in this example, we require 240 hours for ambulatory care. This top chart shows you the total hours that the whole cohort has completed. And the bottom chart will show you the average number of hours for the students. And then this blue line is the distinct count of students. So you can see that we have fewer students over time. And in these middle blocks, 21 through 2023, we actually met the 240 hours on average. One other quick thing we're going to show you, students with timesheets will let you see, again, as you're advising a student, you can pick the student, you can see how many hours they've spent on each rotation. This will show you the number of hours by the date and the rotation block. And that if you actually use time cards as time cards, you can see the average number of hours per shift. Some people do an entire block. It'll be the whole, 40 hours or 80 hours, whatever that might be, as the time card. But you can see here that they were working the average hours. This was actual time cards. So you can see the average length of a shift as well. Do you have any questions about that? There's quite a lot of other information as well in the timesheets. And we won't go through all of those, but it's very easy to be able to tell kind of what's going on in each of those dashboards and identify students or preceptors where you have issues. One of the things that we want to be sure, and we're going to give you kind of a checkoff list, is that as you are setting up these clinical evaluations, these experiential evaluations, a couple of things that will help you no matter who you're using to do your data capture and your evaluations. Be consistent in your naming. An example of that would be as you're naming rotation blocks. If you want to set the dates in CORE, you want to be sure that you start the academic year 2022 to 2023 and not do some of them 23, 24 or something like that. You want to just be consistent with the way that you name things so that it's very easy to sort and filter. You want to use evaluations, the same evaluation over time so that you can track things longitudinally. Same rubrics over time. We know that you'll have changes kind of as you go and need to evaluate new things, but as much as you can, try to use the same ones over time and even across clinical experiences if that's possible. Anything else that you want to add, Corey? I know it's a lot of stuff like fire hose. I'm sorry.
No, this has been great. And so, Jen, thank you so much for sharing your expertise. Jen is the person who created these dashboards and, insight reports. And so ultimately what Enflux does is bring in these siloed data sources that you have, like your core and Canvas and ExamSoft, and put them into one place and then create these dashboards that make it easy to manipulate your longitudinal data and get the insights that you need for all of the reports, and obviously timely feedback that we know is so important. So if you are interested in learning more or you need support using your Core and Enflux platform, please reach out. My name again is Corey. You can email me at corey@enflux.com. There's a QR code if you are, you're not using Enflux yet and you are interested, please, book a call with me and we can talk through your program's individual needs, because just like data, there's everyone has their own thing going on, and we are good at helping create customized solutions. So again, thank you, Jen. Thanks for joining us and carving out this time in your summer to, listen and hear the ways. This is just a tip of the iceberg of all of the reports and information you can get from not only CORE, but through all of those other data sources. So I do hope that we have an opportunity to connect with you individually. So thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon, and I hope you get into a pool somewhere. Take care.